want to do, because this will be like a pre-announcement, because I think people are still kind of coming in. One of the things I like to tell people is that I know that we're here working and we have stuff going on back home. So if you've got laptops and phones and you guys need to work and do stuff, feel free. I have no problem with that. Text and do whatever. I know sometimes when I'm in a conference, I'll be like working, and I'm like, oh, they probably think I'm on Facebook or something. And I'll be frankly doing on Facebook. I don't care either about that. but you know what I mean? Like if you feel free to work and do whatever. I kind of I went through and I spread out the chairs a little bit more so that people could have a little more room and kind of have that leg room and maybe the laptop room if you needed it. But so feel free to kind of work and do what you need to do. I guess, I think people are starting to, I think they're done kind of funneling in, so maybe we'll go ahead and get this show on the road. So, I'm Gaither Stevens. I am CEO of Gaither Dynamic, but under that capacity, I kind of do a lot of things. I'd like to do a couple kind of, again, kind of pre-announcements. The first one, and I talk about this kind of openly because I think it helps maybe when people interact with me, or they see me up here, or they ask me questions. I like to tell people that I have ADHD, but I didn't know this until like the last 2 years, so it's something that I'm still adjusting to. So it's a learning experience. So if I do kind of bounce around a lot, I do apologize. And if you've been on the Whova app, you see me on there a lot. And I don't know, maybe I have a little OCD because those little red dots drive me crazy. So I go in there and I'm like, I'm not going to comment. I just want to get rid of the red dot. And then I'll see something interesting. I'll be like, ooh, squirrel, I'm going to comment on that. So I do start with that. And this is something new that I really haven't shared, but I think it kind of helps, again, because I know I interact with a lot of people. Just over the last couple of years, I was diagnosed with something called Dopamine Agonist Withdrawal Syndrome. And basically what that means, without going into too much detail, is that my dopamine levels are very low. And so I get in front of people, or I interact with people, and I love it. I love the excitement, and I love the passion, and I really just, I just really want to like help push things forward and help people. But then it drains me. And so sometimes the next day I have to just kind of stay in bed, or maybe after I've had like a really good conversation with someone, I'll go back up to the room and I'll just take like a 5-minute break or something. So if you see me and I maybe like look down, or I don't like look right at you or something, just know that that's just kind of something I'm still working on, and it's part of who I am. But I just want to kind of share that because I know everybody in the room is probably going through things, and it's funny because I've had so many people come up to me after I mention certain things, like I might mention imposter syndrome, and someone will go, oh my gosh, I know what that's like, and I go, you know what, everybody does. Because everybody has it to some degree, maybe not this morning, maybe not today, but it's like everybody kind of, I think we all have our ups and downs. So I want to be understanding of other people, and I ask please do the same for me. So thank you for being here, first of all. I hope everybody's comfortable, and I hopefully am going to pass on some things that I think are interesting, and I hope you will too. The first thing I'd like to start with, the questions or the polls that I put into the Whova app, which I thought were really cool. I mean, the questions were okay, the answers were better. So the question I asked, the first one was, what assessment does your COC currently use for prioritization? And we had still ticking up 105 answers now. And the interesting thing is 73 out of 107 still use the Cspd. Understandably, no judgment there. But as most people I'm sure know, there have been some fatal flaws found with the Cspd. And to my knowledge, I don't think it was intentional in any way. But sometimes, when you have people that don't have representation, you tend to get tools that don't represent people. So not really knocking anybody, but just saying that if you're using the Cspd, you really should be looking for an alternative. There are 30 organizations or people that did say that they're using locally developed assessments, and 4 are using other third party. So I just thought that was interesting. The other thing, this is just something, so I have this, something fancy. I live down in Florida. I live in Southwest Florida. I went out earlier just to see the snow because it was cool. But I have this cheap inflatable hot tub, and I go out in it every night, and I just think of like weird things. And so I started thinking about how communities really seem to want to solve homelessness. But I think sometimes we make assumptions with things. We assume that we have the same goals as other people. We assume that you know, that there's just steps that we're here, we want to get here, and I think we assume a lot of the in between. And so the question I asked was, what do you think your community's true goal is? And the two options were to house all people experiencing homelessness in the community, because that's probably what, you know, our goal here is in this room, or is it to not see any people experiencing homelessness in the community? So there's a big difference between, especially when it comes to resources. It takes a lot more resources to house somebody. It doesn't take as many resources to harass somebody, or to get them to move out of your county or your state or whatever, or to put up spikes on a bench. And, you know, and that's sometimes I think helpful to know. And again, I'm not condemning anyone, but sometimes it helps to know the context of the community you're working in. So if they're willing to spend 10% of what it would take to house people, because that 10% is a cost-effective thing for them, and they don't have to see the homeless people and that, or people experiencing homelessness, and that makes them happy, then, and you're trying to house everybody, and you're not understanding why the resources aren't in your community, it might be because you have different goals. And what I'm finding is that by talking to people, being in the community, we can kind of address that, not necessarily in a negative way, but just talking to people, you know, one-on-one, or even leaders in the community, and just finding out really what it is they're trying to accomplish, and then maybe pushing them towards not just, you know, hiding people, but actually helping people. So those are just, you know, I thought, we got all these people at this conference, let's ask some of these questions and see what people in the community think. So with this, I really applaud people for being honest, because 31 said that they want to house everybody. 24 said that they just don't want to see the homeless people in their community. I appreciate people's honesty, but that's not far off from a 50-50 split. All right. And I do happen to, so one of the things I also do, I'll obviously have the slides up here, and I try to talk, you know, off the cuff to some degree, but I do have all the notes in the slide deck. So that way, if I try not to go off too much, but if you want to download the slide deck later, I actually have it on my website. It's gaitherdynamic.com/NHSDC. And you can download the PDF, the PowerPoint, all that. All right, let me get my clicker back. This seems pretty cool. Oh, by the way, I spared no expense. So this is the, we're going to do the agenda now, and I also kind of do the curtain thing. It does that every time. It kind of transitions to a different topic, so I kind of made that there so people will know. Oh yeah, so this is my to-do. If you can't read that, it says you wake up, check, make coffee, check, drink coffee, check, make more coffee, check. I mean, so that's, sometimes I have mornings like that where it's just a constant, you know, circle of coffee. Again, spared no expense. So today we're going to be talking about, we're going to do the introduction. We're going to be working and talking about racial equity, collaboration, tips and tricks, and questions and answers. One of the things I like to do also is I'll really kind of hit the first 3 topics a lot. And then, you know, if we have time to hit tips and tricks, that's great. If we don't, I leave them in the slide deck just so people can download them later. And I think they hopefully can be helpful, especially to HMIS administrators. So, hello. let me skip, see if I have anything to say here. Hello. No, it says tap to add notes. Apparently I don't. but check this out. Spared no expense. Hopefully this works. Okay, so I grew up in Indiana. I was born in Marion in 1975. I think that's a picture from when I was born. It's pretty old. And then from Marion, I actually moved down to a place called Muncie, Indiana, where I went to Burris Laboratory School and Ball State University briefly before I kind of, you know, I didn't get kicked out, but that's me on the left, my friend Steve and my friend Beckett. And then I moved up to Fort Wayne, Indiana to start in radio. And I actually did radio for almost 20 years. And there I am on the left at a concert. We were promoting and emceeing and everything, so that was kind of fun. And then I moved down to Cincinnati, Ohio. And I did not manage WKRP. But there is a WKRC there, and I did manage radio stations. And that's a gentleman from a James Bond movie, Richard Keel, super good guy. And then I went all the way down to Port Charlotte, Florida. And it was quite a trip, about 1,000 miles down the same interstate. And there I started at a local homeless coalition. In the back, you can't see me very well. And then I moved to Punta Gorda, Florida. I didn't go very far, and I did not take a boat, but I thought it was a cool animation. So, that's kind of where I stayed. Oh, and if anybody went to NHSDC last year, it bumped up against the thing called Frolicon. and I learned about something called kitty corns. So my girlfriend didn't want me to put that picture up there, but for Halloween I went as a kitty corn. So I had like a little tutu and a unicorn horn. Anyway, I'm not sharing, I apologize. She's gonna kill me. So for my education, I went to Purdue University, Indiana Wesleyan University, and Boston University. One of the things I like to show, or I like to kind of point out here is, earlier in another presentation I've done, I'll have just kind of the words up here, and then I'll slide the logos over. And one of the things I like to point out is just when you're doing presentations or you're presenting something to a board or people, I think it helps to have stuff that's kind of an added visual effect. I know lots of people learn different ways, so that's why I like to speak. I like to maybe have something on the slide and then maybe even a visual to kind of help out. So I was a regional manager for 18 years managing radio stations. I was a chief technology officer and an HMIS administrator for 5 years at the Gulf Coast Partnership down in Southwest Florida. We were the COC and HMIS lead. And then for 2 years, I've been building data dashboards. I've been working on a learning management system, working on a Cspd replacement. I'm working on a racial equity research and dashboard. And I've done some HMIS consulting, although I don't have a lot of time for that right now, unfortunately. Okay, so this is kind of interesting, and I had maybe, I wasn't really sure what kind of direction to take with the session today. And I was working on a racial equity dashboard for Tennessee, and it was real quick. I found that I just found some problems, I thought to myself, and I thought they were worth sharing. And the first thing I found out, or I kind of discovered and looked into, was racial equity when it came to the COC APR and the ESG CAPER. So this is the current programming specifications for the HUD COC APR and the ESG CAPER. The important thing to note is that if anyone identifies with more than one race, then they are not counted in any individual race category, but rather they're lumped together in a category called multiple races, which frankly is not very helpful when trying to get individual races back out of aggregated numbers. Oh, and this has a laser pointer too, which is pretty cool. So yeah, if you look at this, it's like rows, blah, 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 count one, select each person where a distinct count of races greater than one in any of these categories, you just become a multiple race. So sorry, that's the way it is right now. So how I discovered this was I was working on this dashboard, and I wanted to kind of check the numbers my dashboard and calculations were coming up with versus what was in an HMIS system, which I hate saying HMIS system because I know I'm being redundant. It's like Homeless Management Information System, so sorry about that. So yeah, I ran this APR, and I got 6 clients, and I thought, okay, so when I run my dashboard, I should also, I had that highlighted. I should also get 6 clients under the Asian American category. But when I ran my report, I got 12. And I thought, well, that's weird. How did I mess up? I need to go and actually look at these individual client numbers and see, what it was that I possibly did wrong. So the other thing I noticed was there were 181 multiple race people. I don't know what that means. I'm sorry, but multiple races means kind of nothing, and to some degree. It's just a low category. So, however, I did look back at the dashboard, and I went and I have this option on the dashboard, I guess a pointer, where you can do show only one race. And what the dashboard would do is it would still kind of maintain other races that people might have identified as. So if they identified as an Asian American and maybe Black African American African, they're counted in both of those race categories. They're not lumped into a multiple races category. So what you can see here is that I had 12, and like I said, there was something weird, and I wasn't sure what was going on, and I looked at it and figured out that that's what happened. Anytime you said, if you're one race, you're golden, you're counted, you're good. You say another race, you're just lumped. So I'd like to think about this in the context of Tiger Woods. If Tiger Woods received services and the COC and ESG CAPER were run, he would not show up in the Black African American or African, the Asian or Asian American, or the American Indian, Alaskan, Native, or Indigenous categories, all of which he should. Instead, he's simply multiple races. So again, if you think about this, if you're working like in a COC and you're running a report, you will have maybe 1,000 people in this multiple races category. Possibly, let's say you've got 500 that are Asian American and white. So you've got 2 categories. And maybe you have 500 people that are Black, African American, or African American, Native Hawaiian, or Pacific Islander. But unfortunately, in this 1,000 people, they're just multiple races. However, when you break these down to the other categories individually, 0 people, 0 people, 0 people, 0 people. So, another important point regarding lumping everyone into multiple races categories is that multiple races may look very different in San Francisco versus New Orleans. Again, 1,000 people that identify as white and Asian or Asian American would be lumped into multiple races category, along with thousands of people that are Black, African American, or African, American Indian, Alaskan Native, or Indigenous. So these 2 cities could run the same report and actually have very similar numbers in the multiple races categories, yet they mean nothing as far as similarity. So this can be very dangerous, I think. So, and I don't mean to be rude, but this is not only sloppy, but it does not promote inclusion. In fact, it dilutes the effectiveness of reporting and diminishes the importance of the individual, because as soon as someone adds a second race to their current race is no longer factored into reporting. Imagine being told that because you are more than one race, none of your individual races matter anymore. This can be devastating to someone and is not productive from a social or data-driven perspective. Oh, sorry, something I forgot to mention. At any point, if anybody has questions, I'm fine with like going off on tangents or whatever. So feel free to stop me, or if I don't see your hand or something to do, hey, I want to talk. But I do appreciate, back and forth. So what can be done to fix this? I say add an additional section where each race is counted separately and inclusively, regardless of whether there are more than one race or not. This gives people the option to view races in 2 different ways, rather than limiting them to only one that is ambiguous. So one of the things that I like to do, I don't necessarily think that every solution calls for replacing whatever is already there. If that has to be programmed a certain way because of whatever, right, the APR specifications, that I say that's fine, leave that. But there's no reason why a separate section couldn't be added that would kind of list it out like I've said. So it's like a 7A and a 7B or whatever it might be for that particular section. So that's my suggestion. I'm gonna take a quick sip while the curtains are drying. Okay, so this is kind of cool because, again, this all started because I was working on a racial equity dashboard for Tennessee, which, yeah, oh yeah.
I just have a quick question. So you're saying something similar to like dedupe section and duplicate section?
I don't know. Oh yeah, that would kind of be what it's like, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, really, because you're pulling people out, and I mean, I would suggest that there's a category that doesn't even have the multiple races, that does it in some way that, I don't know, I haven't really thought too fully about it, because I mainly just kind of identified the flaw, and I was hoping to kind of lift it up and see if we could all maybe make a voice to have it fixed somehow. And I do understand it's tough with aggregate numbers, but I still think it could be done in a way that is inclusive and not exclusive.
There is a federal report that our agency, and I'm sure many others in here have to fill out, called the Cspd Report. And in that one, there's a couple categories that have breakout sections. So there's one that's like types of income, and if you select other, there's a sub-table where you fill out what the other is. So it could operate very similarly, so multiple races, and then a breakout table, what are those races, and that would be duplicated numbers.
Yeah, I think that's great, and I think something else that I'd like to point out is that I do know there are HMIS vendors that if your system is kind of standard or the basic whatever, and you haven't made changes for your races, like I know a lot of times with gender you can do multi-select. Some HMIS vendors haven't implemented that yet for race at all, and you're just doing primary race, secondary race, and that's it. And to have the extra races, you have to make a custom assessment, or it has to be something custom you're done. So just be aware of that, because you might want to make sure that that's enabled in your system, just so you can make sure you're collecting all the data for people. Okay, so this is the part I thought was kind of cool. I should probably look at my notes on this, because it's pretty interesting. It just gets me a little, I want to make sure I don't miss anything. In fact, I don't want to skip a slide either, it's probably worse. Hey, somebody's in your house.
That's right.
All right, let's get back to this. All right. Okay, got that, did this. I have my notes up here in like several sections, so I like to confuse myself often. Okay, so this is where I started out. I started out with just looking at data exploration, and I just wanted to kind of start out by looking at number of people and just kind of the basic stuff, breaking things down by how successful are we housing people, how often are they returning to homelessness, kind of the basics of what we do. So, and the system that we're going to analyze, we're going to see that over the course of 2 years, March 1st, 2020 through February 28th, 2022, there were slightly more people who identified as white than those that identified as Black, African American, African. The counts in other race categories were statistically insignificant and therefore not used in this comparison. We'll use these colors for race consistently for easy identification throughout the presentation. So, in this graph, what we're looking at, it's the number of clients in the system by race over time. And initially, these numbers and rates seem to be similar, and you can obviously see here that they're kind of going up at a similar rate. And one of the things that I like to do, I don't necessarily like looking at like one date in time. I really like seeing trends, so I tend to plot things over time if I can help it, if not even further dimensions later. So what I ended up doing is I had to do what's called an axis synchronization, and that allows us to compare apples to apples. So here we can see that emergency shelter, safe haven, and rapid rehousing and transitional housing projects serve more people in the white race category than people in the Black, African American, African race category. So it's pretty simple to see that. But we did have to sync our axes to be able to make that comparison. So next we look at the number of people in our two primary race categories to see how many people get exited to positive destinations. So here they're not too far off. We do have to, I did do a sync, I believe, on the axis sync. It didn't change it too much. But you see that, there's kind of a similar, it's not nothing like too crazy. We'll maybe some stuff in here that I'll probably look at. So, however, in earlier slides, we saw that there were not an equal number of people in each race category. So one of the things I like to do is I'll create a calculation that gives us the successful percentage of people that exited to permanent housing destinations based on individual race categories. So in other words, we're not interested in what percentage of people in the Black, African American, African were successfully placed out of the total number of people of multiple races. Instead, we want to know, out of the number of people in the Black, African category that exited these projects, what percentage of that group was successful. This way we can compare success rates of each category within itself to make sure we're comparing across categories proportionally. Yeah, if you look right here, well, okay, so I've kind of got this calculation going now, so you can kind of see the percentages. So again, they look all right until we do our synchronization of axes. Now, this is the Black, African American, African category. And we're seeing some really good things. We're seeing a very high trend here. But the problem is we're seeing a big divergence right here. Why is that? This is interesting. And we're looking at these percentages. So what's going on here? And I thought, man, this is really cool, I guess. I mean, there's a lot of people being exited to positive destinations. So what could be going on here? But still, I want to tell you, sometimes even when you look at something and go, wow, this looks like a really maybe positive thing, it's still different. It's still divergent in a way. So it's still worth exploring. So I was like, okay, let's kind of keep going and see what's happening here. So to begin my investigation, and this is literally just me and my computer kind of going, hey, I wonder what this kind of looks like, and I wonder what kind of stuff's going on in the system. First, we want to look at the total number of clients by race in each category. So as you can see here, emergency shelter, we've got a few more in the white category, rapid rehousing. I mean, nothing too different that we're seeing here. I mean, the numbers are, obviously a little bit different here, but nothing that we're seeing that's completely out of the norm. But next we look at the number of people in each race category with positive exit destinations by project. Already we're seeing something interesting. Even though there are more people in the white race category in these projects, notice that significantly more people in the Black, African American, African race category as exit to positive destinations. I mean, that's again, it's like we might think that's really good, but is that really the whole picture? It's kind of what I was asking myself. So then what I decided to do was look at the distribution of exit type by this cool little chart that went out to the side. And then of course I synchronized my axes. And if you remember our demographics from earlier, this system had more people in the Black, African American, African category than people in the white category. And when we synchronize our axes, we see that there are significantly more people in the Black, African American, African category than in the white category. This is interesting because the demographics are switched for the number of total clients in the system. So that's a little interesting, because we're looking at sheer numbers here. So that seems a little odd, that you would have one race that's has less people, but another race that has less people being more successful in sheer numbers. But again, I still like to go back to and look at the percentages. Okay, so yeah, we're going to do our apples to apples now. We're going to do our percentage, successfully percentage housed. And then again, I like showing this because it's easy to skip a step or to not think about this, but you always want to sync up your axes. And then when you do, we again see this really, we're doing our apples to apples comparison now, and we're seeing some really big divergence. It's like there's some really interesting things going on here. And it's kind of across the board, but I was like, why? And I'm thinking, this is very interesting. And I don't want to hesitate to be like, this is really positive, but it's like, is it? I don't know. Let's keep kind of, seeing what goes on.
Hey, Gaither, can you explain the numbers across the top?
Yeah.
Labeled percent, but then I wasn't sure what the 0.2 and all that was.
Yeah, so what this is looking at the percentages of house client by month. So it's and it may not be a ton, it might only be like 4%, 2%, whatever. But this is like the success of those people within that group. So it may not be a huge number every month or every whatever, because obviously we work with a lot of people. But it's just the successful percentage that somebody got placed into housing.
So does that mean for emergency shelter, 2.25%
Yes.
of Black, African American, Africans out of everybody that you're looking at in the whole analysis, which is across several years?
Yes.
Were housed? Okay.
That is correct.
Okay, thanks.
So then what I wanted to do was I wanted to start breaking this down by exit destinations. And of course, we're going to need to synchronize our axis. I know I keep doing this, but it's an important step. So as you can see right now, we're a little off on the numbers because I haven't synced these up, but we've got these broken down now. And this is something that I kind of got privy to in my work in the COC, is that sometimes you would have people exit to positive destinations that maybe that didn't exactly happen. In fact, what you start seeing here, some of these sync up pretty close, but then you start seeing some weird things here, like rental by client with the RH equivalent subsidy, that might be all right. Rental by client with VASH housing, they're matched up, that's pretty good. Staying or living with friends or family, permanent tenure, that's a pretty, what I've kind of found sometimes is that can be a kind of a catch-all. Somebody may get, trespassed, or maybe they didn't conform with the rule to wake up at 4 in the morning or 5 in the morning, but miraculously they had friends and family they could go stay with permanently, so that happens sometimes. So I suspect that was my first suspicion. So now what we do is we switch over our calculation that shows the successful exit to permanent destinations. But we're doing this now broken down by category. So let's see, yeah, so we've got, again, this is interesting. These are way different. So why are there so fewer people in this category having this great positive outcome, and yet this staying, if permanent tenure gets off here, but wait, I haven't synchronized my axes. Let's do that, and things get way different. And now we start seeing these changes again. But the ones that are kind of, I would hate to say, what I found is that people are hesitant to use things like this that can be checked out much easier. Some of these, like VASH, those are very hardline. You know, you have to put those that can be followed up on. So it's interesting that those are kind of, oops, I'm gonna go back. So it's interesting that those are kind of, you know, what we would say are, you know, legit, and then we have some of these that are permanent tenure going way off the charts. Now this one, you know, this may be something that's going on with rapid rehousing. Maybe they are working, you know, really well with these clients, but these are the ones that always kind of throw me off and make me kind of wonder what's going on. And there's a good way to check on whether this is something that's legit or not. So, while the anomalies that we are exploring may be explained by cultural or systemic influences, sometimes organizations do attempt, and I'm not saying that this is what's happening in this organization, but I have seen this with a lot of COCs. And it's not even necessarily at the COC level, it can just be down to the case manager or just an intake worker or whatever. And it's not a positive, it's not malicious, they just don't know. You know, they don't know what happened to the client or whatever, and so maybe they you know, just put something in there that's simple. But sometimes agencies, sometimes, I'm not gonna say this is all the time, and I don't wanna be necessarily pointing it out, but sometimes agencies will try to game the system in the short term, but unfortunately this can affect you in the long run. And where that happens is in another system performance measure. Because obviously, you know, permanent placement in housing is an important thing to look at. But we're gonna go a little bit further. We're gonna go back to our client counts, and we're gonna remember that there are slightly more people in the white race category being served in the system than in the black African American race category. So, however, significantly more people in the black African American African race category return to homelessness than people in the white race category. So think about that. A lot more people in one category go to permanent housing, and yet that same category also gets returned to homelessness the most. So this can even be seen when we look at the people that returned to homelessness over the last 2 years in the system. So here are our categories showing all of these people coming back. Now, again, this may not be a ton of people, but it's enough that there's a kind of a trend going on here.
I have a question about the trend lines.
Yeah.
Because they're parallel, doesn't that mean that they're, you know, they're basically the equivalent? They're both going up at a, you know, pretty much exactly the same rate.
For some of those numbers, yeah. I mean, except except the trend lines are definitely different enough that, and again, when you start seeing some of these total numbers, you can kind of see where, go back a little bit. Because what we're seeing is way more particular race is going back to homelessness, even though they represented less on the other side. So it becomes kind of a weird, you know, it's definitely counterintuitive. And then, like I said, I wanted to kind of explore more. So I'll keep going past this, but yeah, you can see the total numbers. And I know the trend lines are tough, and the reason why they're kind of somewhat together is mainly because we're not dealing with a ton of numbers. As you can see, some of these are like, you know, 0 some months, and so the trend lines in this maybe aren't quite as you know, showing off what's going on until we look at kind of the more in-depth exploration of this. So what we have here are the, actually let me just read off here because I think it makes more sense. So remember that we had a disproportionate number of people in the black African American African category exit to destinations that were rental by client, no ongoing housing subsidy, rental by client with RRH or equivalent subsidy, and staying or living with family permanent tenure, which just so happened to be a disproportionate number of people returning to homelessness out of those same categories. This could be a sign that the destination is incorrect, or maybe there are other things going on that we're still not yet aware of without digging even deeper. But this is just kind of one of those things where I would start going through and seeing these differences, and it seems weird that you would have people disproportionately leaving towards positive destinations and then showing back up in the system as homeless again. And I've seen this before in COCs where and this is where it's that kind of deeper data analysis. I would look at our system performance measures, and I would notice that some of our permanent placements were really high, and I thought, well, this is great, until I would look at my returns to homelessness, which were high, and I thought, well, wait a minute, is there some kind of crossover going on here? And what was happening in our system that I've worked on, not this one, was that people were just kind of going, anytime they didn't want to deal with somebody, they would exit to that positive destination, and lo and behold, the very next day, they were back at street outreach. So that's why kind of, contextual knowledge really means a lot in what we're doing. And I know that so many of us are really just trying to get the LSA out the door, or the system performance measures, or the HIC. But if you're not doing a little extra work, another tip I like to tell people, if you're seeing differences between your length of time averages and your median, then you probably have outliers, and you can go in and find those outliers and kind of correct some of that data. Or, that's where you have those people that have been in a shelter for 3 years because somebody forgot to exit them. That's where this kind of data analysis comes in, and it doesn't really mean that you have to spend hundreds of hours doing this. This probably took me, I don't know, I think this was like a couple hours and some screenshots. This is just kind of my standard process of just going, oh, that looks weird. Oh, those numbers look odd, or that graph looks strange. And then I don't necessarily come to straight conclusions until I start looking at the individual clients, and then I'll work with the organization and say, can we contact these clients, maybe find out what's going on, maybe even break it down to an agency-specific report that shows an agency, sending people to positive destinations, yet returning to homelessness, or it can even happen where it's one individual. But that's where the data analysis and really being able to dig into your system can really help out a lot. So now that we've broken this down to individual components, possible next steps may include contacting clients to see if their destinations were recorded correctly, see if the anomalous exits could be attributed to one user or one agency, and we could add contextual information to assessments to reduce errors. Maybe it's just simply they don't know, and that just seems to be the one that other people did, or that was the example in the training, so they thought that's the one they used every time. Sometimes things are just simple mistakes, but other times it could be something more, but it's, I think, always worth the explanation, or the exploration of that. Okay, so next we're going to go on to collaboration, because that's kind of, I think, one of the reasons we're all here. It's great to be able to talk amongst each other and to collaborate and learn, take it back to our communities, and hopefully go back there and collaborate. That's, I think, what we're hopefully all going to do. So, when I left my COC, we'd achieved functional zero for veterans experiencing homelessness, and we were in the final stages of attaining functional zero for people experiencing chronic homelessness as well. We were super excited about that, and it did take a lot of work from a lot of people. What worked for us? It was master case conferencing twice a month, and these are suggestions. I'm not saying anything up here is like this is what you have to do. It's just something that happened to work for us, so I thought maybe I could pass it along. We did separate meetings for veterans and people experiencing chronic homelessness. We had a by name list in HMIS, which was actually kind of handled. We had a 24-hour access point, information easily accessible via 211 and our website. We had a coordinated entry project. We had a dedicated coordinated entry project in HMIS. This was super helpful running reports and being able to just drill down and really see what was happening, was having that project specific thing. And it took, it's kind of double entry to some degree, maybe somebody else has to keep track of who's in it and back and forth, but it worked really well for us. Rapid rehousing with wraparound services was really important for us. So that's when the community collaborations came in. We had housing, rapid rehousing vouchers, mental health facility also helping us out with a SOAR expert, and we had a physical health connection and connections to SOAR, getting people on waiting lists early. That was something that we found was interesting, is sometimes case managers would work with clients to find them housing, and if they couldn't, maybe they'd work for 6 months or however long it might take, and then they'd get kind of frustrated. They'd be like, oh, I can't get them into that place because it's got a 2-year waiting list. And sometimes they work with clients long enough, it's like if you didn't put them on the list the first day, they'd have already gotten into housing. So, even if you don't think they will, because it might be 2 years or 6 months or whatever it is, still put them on the list because you might get lucky. And sometimes people sit out in the woods so long that they can get into those places because the waiting list clears up. And then the other thing I like to do is system mapping. So I'm gonna scoot over here and drink the water and kind of let you see this. I know it's kind of blurry, I guess. So I'll explain it. So at the top, you're seeing the typical access, assessment, prioritize, and referral. So on the left side, what you see are all of our access points. So we made sure to list those all out, and we made sure everybody in the community, especially the stakeholders, had this, so they knew what we were actually trying to do. There was an intake script that we would do, which usually consisted of the Cspd and something else. And then we would try to divert if we could. So if it was like a medical crisis, or if you had domestic violence, anything like that, that would go direct referral immediately to the agency. Anything that was like an emergency type situation. And then everybody else would kind of bypass that, and then they would go through the coordinated entry access point. And then I guess the intake script was probably more of a super fast thing, like, are you in danger, blah, blah, blah. It would be very specific quickly. And then it was actually after that we would do the full intake. So I want to kind of make sure that that's understood here. So like I said, it's kind of blurry up here. So at that point, once we did the assessment, the Cspd, we would then take them into our coordinated entry kind of queue, so to speak, and prioritize them, of course. And our by name list was kind of broken down by funding. It's like we couldn't really afford to help everybody. So the people that we could afford to help or had specific programs like veterans, HIV/AIDS, chronically homeless, those would kind of get prioritized categorically because that's where we had the funding. And then we would use like the Cspd score. Now I know that obviously most communities are going away from that, but this is what we did in the past. And then we would map these to the specific housing services that they would need. But this was just kind of handy, especially for those in the community to kind of see what we did. And this is also kind of one of my main kind of big pushes is for visualization of data and system mapping, and just a way for people to kind of go, oh, that's what it looks like. And they can refer back to this and see maybe where they're at in this chart, and maybe you can tweak it as necessary. But it kind of gives people, I think, that overview of what we're doing. So this was something that I thought helped us out a lot, and I know the conference is vendor neutral, but we did build a by name list into our HMIS, and it wasn't something that was necessarily standard, but we used an existing product within their system to be able to do this, and it was just really handy. Before that, we had done the like Excel spreadsheets, and we would email them back and forth or put them on encrypted drives and whatever you needed to do. But it was who has the most up-to-date one, and does this one have nodes, and can we, I don't know, it never seemed like an easy way of kind of distributing that. So what we ended up doing was putting it in our HMIS, and then everybody had access to basically the real-time version of it. And the way I did it was I set it up as a shelter, and then used these as like beds. So I just pretended that there were people that were like in beds, and it ended up working out pretty well. But if you can, I would recommend having your by name list in your HMIS, because it does really help, I think, with just the organization and also with helping the agencies. So I'm going to kind of show you now one of the cool things about having a specific coordinated entry project is then you can do really neat analysis on it. So this is actually something I did, this is probably 3-4 years ago now for my old COC. And I started wanting to look at just kind of inflow and outflow. So this big red line you're seeing right here is, I believe this is when coordinated entry became like mandatory. But we got to be able to see kind of this big influx, and we can kind of start watching and seeing as our clients would enter and exit the coordinated entry project. And it was just a really kind of cool way to see per month like what was happening and just the progress we were making. So after we kind of refined our methods more thoroughly, we noticed that our coordinated entry list also mirrored our by name list very closely. And the cool thing about this is it led us to be approved for using our by name list in HMIS for the 2021 PID, which I think only like 20 COCs in the country were able to do. But this was really nice because it kind of gave us that heads up on what our PID might look like. And this was basically a lot of work by street outreach, constantly staying in contact with people, and making sure that we had those contacts and that information in our system. And we were able to kind of look at this and go, you know what, wow, our coordinated entry, our by name list, and people out in the woods and everything, it matches up, and it really kind of gives us some confidence, I think, in our system. So we also tracked the number of people entering our homeless system to see if they were subsequently entered into the coordinated entry system via an access point. So what we had early on, maybe somebody would come to street outreach or, who knows, a different project, and I would see that enrollment, and the person was coming in as homeless, but I didn't see them come into the access point at the same agency, and I was like, well, everybody that comes into the system has to go into coordinated entry. That's how the thing works. So what we started doing was measuring participation rates by agency. And again, this wasn't so much to call anyone out, because we gave everybody a heads up that we were going to be doing this, so they had the chance to kind of get people in the system. But it was a really good way for us to go, you know what, agency this, you're doing great, agency this one, not so great. And then it gave us kind of an ongoing participation rate that we could hopefully see was going up.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How did you compare, like, did they give you their list? How did you know what the clients they interacted with but weren't in the system if you don't have them in the system?
I just ran like reports myself. I just would kind of look back. I honestly, what I would do is I would run like a client list for an agency. So maybe like say it was our vet shelter, and I would run a list, and if it had like 22 people in it or 220 people, whatever it might be, I would then run the coordinated entry list, and I would actually have all those people, and then I would compare them in Excel side by side, and I would fill in gaps, and I'd be like, oh, that person's not there, that person's not there, and then I would highlight it, and I'd email the agency and be like, hey, why aren't these people in coordinated entry? So it was a very manual process. Sometimes I would do things in Tableau to help me out, but a lot of times it was just dropping one list in Excel, another list in Excel, compare them and see who's missing. So it was just very kind of grunt work, but it was, it was effective. And me doing that was better than going to the agency and being like, hey, you only have a 70% participation rate, fix it. Because if they're gonna go, okay, I've got a lot more to do than that. But if I could send them a list of numbers and be like, hey, these 50 people aren't in coordinated entry, they'd be like, okay, well, you gave us the IDs, you gave us the specific people, and then they would usually go through and do it. So I kind of met them halfway on that, especially because it was new back then. Oh, okay, so this is, what this is showing is the Cspd, but it's showing the vulnerability of the people coming into the coordinated entry system. And what I liked about this was that we were seeing that the majority of people that we were serving were above the two main the recommendations that the Cspd would do, which would be either no intervention for housing, RH or PSH. So this is the line for permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing right here. And as you can see, most of the people that went into our coordinated entry system were kind of, I think a lot of people were diverted, and so that's why you're seeing the people that did come into the system tend to actually have high needs. And again, remember that even though we're not using, well, a lot of communities aren't using the Cspd, and many are moving away from it. This is from a few years ago when it's kind of really what most people have. So this is kind of what ended up happening in our community. We saw a really big reduction in our sheltered and our unsheltered pit. This is actually a graphic that I was not allowed to give out because locally in the community, I can talk about it, at national things, but in the community, they didn't necessarily want this out there because the thought process was, if they don't think there are people that are homeless here, then they're going to stop funding us, which I thought was an interesting but dynamic. But again, that probably goes back to that poll earlier, where what's the community's real goal, and you have to be careful that you don't make. I don't know, and that's, I don't want to go off on a tangent, but just be careful. I'm a person I like transparency. I would rather have numbers out here like this, and then explain that just because we don't have as many people out there every day, that doesn't mean we don't need money. That just means we're being super effective with the limited resources we have. So I would rather rather than hiding data or hiding graphs and charts, I would rather have them out there and then be able to explain them intelligently. Okay, so I didn't do a lot on the whole on pandemic and COVID because, man, we're all tired of this. I mean, we're just so tired of it. And I mean, I don't mean tired of as far as like, we don't want to deal with it. It's just, we're just, I think, mentally tired, and I think people have probably heard a lot about it. So I'll cover this quickly, but I think it was, neat what we were able to do. So due to our reputation as an organization in our community as like being a data leader, which I thought that was a little much, but we put charts on the website. Most people couldn't do that in Southwest Florida, so, well, at least not, sorry, Charlotte County specifically. So what happened was the local county government wanted to be able to, along with United Way and a community foundation, they wanted to be able to start helping people that had been affected by COVID financially. So we're a service industry state down in Florida, so all the restaurants were closed, a lot of the venues, and so we had a lot of people that needed to be able to get financial assistance. And the county would have to do RFPs and budget approvals and all this, and they wanted a website built as quickly as possible that could accept applications. So in about 72 hours, we built a website called the COAD, Community Organizations Active in a Disaster. And we processed thousands of applications. And I think I just used something called Contact Form 7 built into WordPress. It was not complicated, but the county couldn't do it. So that was cool. We had this website up, we were taking applications, we were helping people. It was amazing. We were working with the county, we had a front of the house, back of the house. Things were just working really well. We had a SharePoint drive. And then, and it's so funny, this is so long ago, that maybe people forget that it was a big deal that everybody wanted to get tested. All of a sudden they had these COVID tests, and people were like, oh, we need to get tested for COVID. And there were these, and in Florida what they did was the state just gave all these doses, or all these test kits to the counties, and were like, hey, test your people. And the counties were like, well, wow, wait, what? We have no infrastructure for this. We don't have phone banks set up. We don't have, I'm sure Miami did in a lot of big cities, but most places in Florida didn't. So they were like, hey, can you add scheduling to this website so that people can schedule their COVID-19 tests? And I was like, yeah, why not? I don't do enough already. Like, this sounds fun. So 48 hours later, I had taken a $60 template or plugin for WordPress. I think it was used for gym memberships and hair salon appointments. And I just changed some of the wording. Instead of gym, it was test, and whatever, workout, it was PCR, I don't know, I don't remember what it was exactly, but I changed some stuff at the back end, and we started doing the test scheduling through the website. It was cool, we had these lists, and I'd send them to the county every day, and we would make sure that people signed up, and they showed up, and they had their name on the list, and everybody got tested, and it was great. Until we had something else come up, and all of a sudden we had vaccinations. And vaccinations were even bigger than testing. So they asked us if we could add a vaccination schedule to the website, which had 40,000 people. I know, I know, right? I can't believe this in there. You can't read this. Rare snake dies trying to eat giant centipede in Florida park. This is not big news. This is every day in Florida. And that's why I left it up there, because it's just part of my life now. So we had 40,000 people hit the website, and it crashed because the week before I'd asked the CEO if we could upgrade it, and they were like, yeah, no. Then they upgraded it afterwards. And then we could handle 40,000 people a day if we needed to. And why did we have 40,000 people hit the website? It wasn't just our county, it was all of Florida, and it was New York, and it was all these people across the country trying to get appointments for their grandma, for their sister, for their nephew, because they were out of state and this was online. Anyone could access it. So it was crazy, it was wild, but we were just very fortunate to kind of be there at the right place at the right time and kind of were able to help out. And then they brought in, after that, Publix, and Publix started handling, Publix is the largest grocery chain down in Florida, and they ended up taking over the scheduling, and their site crashed. So, I didn't feel too bad. Okay, so the next thing I'd like to talk about is the COC Alliance. If you don't know what the COC Alliance is, we have over 850 members providing peer support to everybody. We have HMIS admin, COC leadership, we do advocacy, we have a Slack and a Facebook group, and it's free. So I'd say probably like a third of the people that are at the conference are probably in Slack. And all it is we just help each other every day. All I'm doing right now is kind of a PSA, because I know we're all probably swamped, and we're all trying to do the same thing and reinvent the same wheel. But this is just a resource. You can just go to cocalliance.org and click, and Slack, if you don't know what it is, it's just real-time chat. And so if you go in there and you want to know something about ESG, or you want to know something about how to set something up in a certain system, there's probably going to be somebody in there that'll help you out. I mean, it's almost like a bunch of just like, helping buddies. I mean, we're just, most of the people I know that are in here, and thank you to everyone for being in here because there's so many great people. I've met them like through Slack, and it's been fantastic. So this is one of the things that I'd like to really kind of just point out, and hopefully people can take away from this, because I think it's really helpful. Sometimes I watch my own slide and I'm like, what's next? Hey, it's data quality. Everybody's like, no, we talked too much about data quality. I won't go too much over this. Again, some of the stuff I keep in the slide deck because I know as an HMIS administrator 5 years ago, I would have killed for something like this helpful and just, and really just, it's just so, when I say kill, probably like, a beer, or maybe 5, when you're trying to work on all this stuff, it can be rough. Okay, so again, I know people are probably like, data quality, this is gonna be boring, which, okay, it probably is a little bit, but I love visualizing. And what this is actually a visualization of data quality for an organization. And what's cool is you can kind of see some of these spikes happen a lot of times around like usually reporting periods or HUD standards, which are pretty cool to actually see almost like happen in real time when you're doing it. And then what also happens that's really cool is if you start getting really big data quality kind of spikes in particular areas, you'll see them grow over here in the graph. This actually came in handy when I had a food pantry. Well, I had a bunch of clients in the system with poor data quality, and I didn't know why. And I was able to kind of see that there was a big spike, and I was able to track it down to a new intake worker at a food pantry was intaking like hundreds of people terribly, and then another like case manager would be like, oh, look the person up in the system, see that they had information put in like the day before, and would just be like, yeah, let's just forward that information straight through. That looks good, that's a good entry. And they didn't realize that the person in the food pantry was not filling it out right, and then we were getting all this bad data in our system. So it's kind of a warning. I'm all for like having food pantries and all kinds of other stuff in your HMIS. Just be careful that you're not transferring their data to projects that are HUD funded, et cetera. But I was able to track this down to one person, had a great conversation with them, and then made sure they actually went through training, because they were kind of like, I think they kind of like did training, but you just like you've gone through it. And I was like, no, let's work on some of these specific areas. But one person I was able to identify simply from a graph. This is something else I'd like to point out. I think data dashboards and grades are awesome. I won't say who gave me the idea for grading, but it was one of the HMIS vendors, and I still think it's a great idea. I find these to be extremely motivating. I love having grades. I will say that if you're going to put grades out, let's see, do I talk about this? I think I do. So yeah, so here's something I would recommend when it comes to data quality, without going too deep into everything. Run data quality reports at least monthly, if not more often. Don't data shame. Give people a heads up before posting data quality reports, and give them the tools to fix them first. Recruit agency rock stars. So it helps to have someone at an agency that you can trust and rely on to fix data quality issues. And this usually means going to the agency, seeing what they do, and getting to know them. I'll tell you right now, if you don't go to your agencies and you don't go to the organizations that you're working with, you're missing out. Because you're not going to understand their processes as well. You're not going to have that face-to-face or that kind of camaraderie. When you get in there and you shake hands and you sit down and you learn, that's when you really make those connections. And it makes it easier to work the system, because you know what it's supposed to look like, and you can go, are you supposed to be doing that? And then when you walk in there and you're like, oh no, hey, can we do it this way? But if you're just kind of doing it from that high level perspective, and you're not seeing the walking the data or walking a report from here to here, or maybe just something minor that could be tweaked, then it's going to hurt you in the long run. It helps to really have that connection on site to see what's really going on. So also help people with their reports, and they're going to help you with yours. So that's something I learned, is a lot of reciprocity. And when I would send out a data quality thing and be like, hey, could you fix this? And they would send it back to me, I would praise them, I would thank them, I would tell them how much I appreciated it. I did not look at it as you have to do this, or this, I'm punishing you. Okay, this is something that, like, thank you. And I got so much good and positive response by doing that. And I know this might be kind of iffy for a lot of people, but I do recommend posting your data quality where the public can see it. Don't be ashamed. This might be hard at first, but a lot of times things are. Things can be uncomfortable at first, but then they can get better because of it. I would rather not ignore something. I would rather address it and then make it better than just keep it broken in the background and just let's not talk about it. So offer tools the agencies can use to run their own reports or get their own information. This reduces the burden on HMIS staff. So this is a dashboard that for Collier County down in Florida. So this is kind of cool, just putting your data out there, letting people see what you're doing. They may not understand it, but they're gonna appreciate it. And you know what, I know some people go, oh, but then they're gonna ask us questions. That's good. We want to engage people. We want to have questions asked. We want to be able to deal with problems. We don't want to just stay under the radar and hope they keep giving us money. Again, here's an inflow and outflow. I love things like this. Why is there a spike? I need to know why. I would not be able to see this without visualizations, because in September, maybe there were 100 people, and then, I don't know, in August, there were only, say, 60. But maybe I'll remember that month to month. I don't know. There's so many numbers that go through your head all the time when you're working at an organization that, I don't know, 60 to 100, I mean, what was it one month before? I don't know, let's look at all these numbers. But man, visually, you can just see all that. You can see what's going on here with the chronically homeless, with children, with veterans. It's amazing. I love being able to see this stuff visually. I just put this up here because it's kind of cool looking. So this is a system flow by last exit chart. So this is the living situation when someone comes into a project. This is where they flow to, like as far as the project that they enter, and then this is their destination. So it's kind of a last snapshot of what happens when somebody leaves your system. So they come in, maybe they came in as experiencing homelessness, a good chunk of a coordinated entry, and they might simultaneously go in emergency shelter. So they might show up twice on this chart. But that's important because it's okay for them to do that. And then where did they go? Some of these people went up here to other, a lot of went to permanent. And really what you're wanting to see is this big homeless over here gets smaller when it comes to permanent and temporary. You're wanting to see a lot of green. But sometimes, again, just finding creative ways to map your data and to see it, it's just your light bulbs are gonna go off in your brain. Okay, I'll tell you what I'm gonna go ahead and do is I'm gonna skip the tips and tricks part because it's more like nuanced for HMIS administrators. And like I said, the slides are available on the website at gaitherdynamic.com/NHSDC. So I'm just gonna skip these because what I wanna do is I wanna get to the questions part because I know we're gonna be wrapping up. And I like to give people extra time if they need to step out and get a drink or anything like that. So let me just skip through this. I also, one of the things I like to point out is I do have a lot of live links, so you may want to download the actual PowerPoint. I put two up. I put one version that's large that has the cool videos that you probably don't really care because you know where I'm from already. And then there's one that has a smaller footprint and it's easier to download, but these links are all live in that. So these are really cool links. And then maybe not, you might know all of them or you may not, but they're there to help, and I think it's nice to have them kind of stuck in one place. So, all right, do we have any questions that are easy? Questions. Yes.
So you mentioned in one of the slides the 211 number. Is that like a hotline that's?
Yeah, 211. So a lot of communities have a 211. So like 411 for information.
Yeah.
211 is kind of like that too, but it can be more. Sometimes it's like social services, and it's different wherever you go. Like ours, it's supposed to be like people need maybe financial assistance or they're trying to find mental health facility or something. But they get a lot of like calls for Domino's, I guess, and so they help out whoever they can. But so yeah, 211 is just like an information and referral system. Some communities have.
And this is we can find the presentation at Gaitherd.com.
Yeah. So it's right here. This last one, this Gaitherd or Gaitherd Dynamic, either one will work. / and then NHSDC. Yeah.
How is your exit data in your HMIS coordinated entry project? We have a similar system where we have entries going into coordinated entry, referrals going through it, but then the exit quality is kind of bad because they'll get referred to a battery housing program or CHSP funding or something along those lines, and then they're never exited from coordinated entry. So we end up with this mass amount of people in our coordinated entry project, and no exits being done. So then, as an HMIS lead, we have to go in and then do kind of a mass exit, try to figure out if they ended up going into a project or, just doing a 90-day after, like, no follow-up. And
So-
it becomes a lot of extra work, and we use 211 as well. 211 does data entry into our coordinated entry, but they kind of just go, all right, let's get you in, let's get a eligibility done, and send off a referral, and then that's kind of their thing. All right, we're all done, perfect.
So I've got a bad answer for you. I kind of did what you did. I would just look at I would do my own 90-day reports. I use Tableau a lot just because I like Tableau, and I found it easy to drag data out, and I would just pop things into category or rows and columns. And I would just look at clients that hadn't received a service in 90 days usually, and then I would, or had a long length of time in the project. Sometimes I would do that as well. And then I would send out emails with the list of client IDs of people that have been in the system 90 days without a service, and I would tell the agency, hey, either close this person out, find out what's going on, or just follow up on it. And then that's what we did. Really.
Follow-up question. For your by name list, are you going through coordinated entry as well? And are you sending a referral from your coordinated entry to your by name list? Or are you kind of going in there and manually entering people that are case conference and then putting them into your by name list yourself?
Well, I mean, basically, everyone that was homeless went onto the by name list. And everybody that was homeless went into the coordinated entry system. And then once they were housed, or something, permanent else happened, then that's when we exited them. And it would always try to line up with, whatever they went into. As long as they were in the project, but housing was always that exit for us. All right, well, thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.